Okay, Isaiah 58. This is actually 3rd Isaiah in the 58th chapter. Oh, I was going to read from the Message. That's what I was going to do. Sorry. The bottom line on your fast days is profit. You drive your employees much too hard. You fast, but at the same time you bicker and fight. You fast, but you swing a mean fist. The kind of fasting you do won't get your prayers off the ground. Do you think this is the kind of fast day I'm after? A day to show off humility, to put your pious long face and parade around solemnly in black. Do you call that fasting? A fast day that I, God, would like? This is the kind of fast day I'm after. To break the chains of injustice, get rid of exploitation in the workplace, free the oppressed, cancel debts. What I'm interested in seeing you do is sharing your food with the hungry, inviting the homeless poor into your homes, putting clothes on the shivering ill-clad, being available to your own families. Do this, and the lights will turn on, and your lives will turn around at once. The God of glory will secure your passage. Then when you pray, God will answer. You will call out for help, and I'll say, here I am. Gospel comes from Matthew chapter 5. In the 5th chapter, please stand as you are able for the reading of the gospel. You are the salt of the earth. But if salt has lost its taste, how can its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything, but is thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A city built on a hill cannot be hid. No one, after lighting a lamp, puts it under a bushel basket, but on the lampstand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. This is the wisdom of God. Well, I had my physical this week. I didn't have an EKG, but I'm pretty sure I'm okay there. I don't know. But they did tell me the normal things. Eat better, get more exercise, and don't eat so much salt. It's kind of hard when most of your diet is processed food. You have to look at the labels. I buy the low-salt versions, which really, I don't understand. It's a low-salt version, meaning it has less salt in it, but it's more expensive. I grew up with a father who loved salt. Every meal was salt and bread. He salted his food before he tasted it. My mother always was on him for that. It's really a bad thing you're doing there. So I grew up thinking that salt was not something that was very good. But that's wrong. Salt is necessary for life. Has anybody read Mark Kulansky's book, Salt, A World History? Fun book. He says almost every part of the human body contains salt, which is a necessary component in the functioning of cells. Without both water and salt, cells could not get nourishment and would die of dehydration. He also points out that salt is the only rock that we eat. Here's salt. Did you know that growing up? I didn't know it was a rock. You can eat it. I won't. And there are many kinds of salt. One only has to ask Katie Rugg. She has all kinds of salt. Salt, it turns out, is not bad, but essential for the body and for the society. Given this, what does it mean to say, we're the salt of the earth? According to Kulansky, there are at least 101 well-known uses for salt. The salt industry counts even more, including manufacture of pharmaceuticals, melting the ice from winter roads, fertilizing fields, making soap, softening water, and dyeing textiles. When I was a child, I knew none of this. And if somebody had asked me, where does salt come from? I would say it's someplace called Morton. But there are huge, larger uses for salt, and the first one is preservation. Anybody have eaten North Carolina salt pork? That stuff could hang around forever. It is so salty, and I was forced to eat it, because if I didn't eat it, I would never be a Southerner. The saltiest thing I ever ate was in Japan, called umeboshi, pickled plums. Went to a retreat called umeboshi, and we were challenged to eat 10 umeboshi. It's really salty, really salty. Salt allowed for meat and fish to be preserved for export that transformed economies, and through that made some people rich and some people poor. One of salt's primary uses is preservation. So I want to look a little more symbolically and ask ourselves, what do we need to preserve? Because I'm thinking about this all the time. Why? You know why. I go through all the stuff in my house and have to decide, do I preserve this or do I throw it away? It's a hard business to do this. And one of the persons in the church asked me some time ago, what's the criteria I use for making these decisions? It's hard, and it's not an easy time in the time when one experiences loss. I look around my living room, I still have a few things up, and I see things that awaken the past in me. I feel sensations of the people who those things represent. I have a calligraphy of my Osho-sans from Hokkaido. Big piece of calligraphy that says, white cloud, one walking. My father's watercolors. That's what he did in retirement, and I have many of those. I have a silver platter that was given to my parents when they were married from a man named Liston Pope, who is a relative of my mother's and was the dean of Yale Divinity School. They gave it to us on our 25th wedding anniversary. There are pictures that were once in my parents' house and ones that were in my in-laws' house, and I have to decide. The ones from my parents' house was a fog in San Francisco that I was associated with our time there. And I always remember telling my siblings, I want that one. And now I got it. That criterion, I said in the past, is sentimental value, but that's not the real word. It's more about connectional value. Connectional value. How an object represents my relationship to people who have filled my life. My current situation, to be reminded of those, is kind of a painful blessing. But for example, I have an antique chair. I don't know what I'm going to do with this thing. From, which was it? Hamilton, North Carolina, now I remember, from my mother's Aunt Cody's house. Now, when I sit in that chair, I may not realize it, but that connects me back to all of that, to North Carolina, to the people I've known there, my family, and it's a real good reminder. I didn't even know Aunt Cody, but it connects me to even her as well. We don't think this way, do we? We live in a utilitarian world where we ask, what can I do with this? Rather than valuing art, for instance. Products are made to fall apart so we get new ones. Always things are better if they're new. Every time there is an upgrade, it's a good thing, is it? If I get an upgrade on my computer, wherever it comes from, I'm set 2 months it'll take me to even get an understanding of it. But new is good. What happens is we lose contact with our traditions in the past. Surely part of this message of preservation, I believe, is to preserve our values and traditions, hold on to that which has shaped and unified us. I think of the Jewish people in this regard. They have preserved their culture and traditions, holding ritual experience and practice, tending to relationships and family, preserving an intellectual and artistic story, while we drink the elixir of freedom. Freedom is vital, but it's empty. I remember the song, "Freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose." It leaves us with little to love. This cultural attribute, Paul would say, does not build up. We have to build up together. To be salt of the earth first is to preserve relationships, preserve our environment, preserve our church, and sometimes preserve the stuff that reminds us of all that's come before us. The second aspect of salt is associated with purity. Has anybody here seen sumo? Anybody here seen sumo? Well, you can get it on NHK if you look hard. Anyway, if you see it, they start throwing stuff in the ring all the time, and they throw this stuff. What's that stuff? Salt. Why? To purify the ring. And at some temples, they have little things of salt that you're supposed to take and put on your head to purify yourself. Purification. A little trouble with this cord here today. In Numbers it says, "It is an everlasting covenant of salt before the Lord to you and your descendants with you." In Colossians it says, "Let your speech always be with grace and seasoned with salt, so that you may know you ought to answer every person." I love that. Seasoning our words with salt. The most significant thing about purity is not sex. It's not about young women making covenants of sexual abstinence. It's about having a pure heart. It even says in the Beatitudes, "Blessed are the pure in heart." John Wesley used different language. He talked about perfect in love, but it seems very similar to me. I like Psalm 51, where it says, "Create in me a pure heart, O God, and put a new and right spirit in me." This is the verse I want empaneled on Congress. We're talking again about integrity, I think. Today in politics, people would rather win than be good. And what we need today, my estimation, is good people. When I became a parent, I said to myself, if there's anything I want for my children to become, I want them to have good hearts. Our culture says it's about success and accomplishment. And that's what's created the 118th Congress. No, we want good people there. Don't we want good people there? The third aspect of salt is one that I didn't consider until I read Mark Kulansky's book, but salt is about relationships and empires and, I'm sorry to say, politics. Salt was an essential element of life, and it became a commodity which was bought, sold, traded, and taxed, which faded suffering, particularly for the poor. Rulers made sure access was convenient and kept that access from other people. If one could control the production and distribution of salt, one could control the people. How many of you saw the movie Gandhi? Anybody see the movie Gandhi? If you haven't, I really recommend it. Before seeing that movie, I hadn't known much about the life of Gandhi, and I didn't know much about the salt riots. The story is that the British did control production and distribution of salt in India. And the British Indian salt was relatively cheap. It was too cheap. It was so much cheaper than Liverpool salt that nobody was buying Liverpool salt. So they raised the prices and made them equal to Liverpool salt and charged that to the Indians for their own salt. That didn't work, so they just shut down the salt works, which led to a famine. The part that was so difficult in the movie, 78 years old, Mohandas Gandhi walks, 100 miles to the beach to the salt works. And all the men, not women, no women were in this, all the men were lined up. And there were the men with the clubs. And they would come up, nonviolent resistance. And they get hit in the head, and they all go off to the medical tent. That is oppression. I think that part of the story of salt is also to seek love and equality amongst people, however that is. So what does it mean to be salt of the earth? What does it mean? I also like the image that Isaiah brought out, light to the nations. Not chosen, but chosen to live a certain way in light of the gospel of Jesus Christ and to hold certain values and make them be the core of our life. It's not just about having personal freedom and then going to heaven. It's about creating clean hearts in us and a better world. So it's about preservation. It's about purity. And hopefully it's about equality.